If more of you supported the show, I'd be less sick of podcasts.
Blah, blah, blah.
Sending out good vibes.
Blah, blah, blah.
Good vibes.
Blah,
Good vibes.
blah, blah.
Good vibes. Good vibes.
108 breaths of deep gratitude and prayers for guidance and protection. And put on a didgeridoo and shamanic drumming track. Shivers or vibrations and stuff like that.
He's the only one who survived. He was 11 in the snow and ice, and these are like granite cliffs, with ice chutes. He had to make his way down safely. When he finally got down kind of to more flat land, it was all covered with snow. The only way he was found is because a woman thought she had heard a plane crash.
Okay, guys, welcome back to the Grimerica Show. We are going to be chatting with friend of the show, David Mathisen, personal buddy of mine, one of my favorite all-time guests, just because we ended up being good friends after. We ended up
Not just because, huh?
Well, because he's a great guest.
Yeah.
That's what I meant to say, not just because. That's right. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks to Blue Blocker Boy. Of course, we ended up synchronistically seeing the Great American Eclipse about 10 miles from each other, but never actually met up. And it's too bad because it would have been good to get stuck in the traffic and camp on the side of the road with a guy that can tell you a bunch of star myths. Anyway, enjoy the chat. David W. Mathisen.
All right, we got David Mathisen back with us, one of our favorite guests, a friend of the show. Somehow he's pumping out more books on star myths. We're going to talk about his latest one, which is The Ancient Worldwide System, Star Myths of the World, Volume 1. And he's already got like Volume 2, 3, and 4 of Star Myths of the World, where he talked about ancient Greece and the Bible and Norse mythology. And way back when we met him, I think it was The Undying Stars, was the book from 2014. And then still pumping out other ones like Astrotheology for Life and Ancient Myths and Ancient Wisdom. So, how are you doing this, David? How are you still pumping out these huge books so often?
Hey, thanks for having me on, Graham. That's a great question. It's like, it's almost like I'm discovering fossils. If you went out in your backyard one day after a rainstorm there in Calgary, and you saw this huge canyon, it opened up in your backyard after the rain, and you saw all these like dinosaur bones on the side, and you just started pulling them out, and somebody be like, wow, Graham, you just pulled out a, Tyrannosaurus, and then now you just found a Brontosaurus, and now you just found another one. How are you cranking out all these dinosaurs? And you'd say, I don't know, they're just right, they're right there. It's almost like I'm discovering these connections. It's not like I'm having to crank them out. When I say that all the world's myths are based on a common system of celestial metaphor, what I mean is that the characters and the episodes are based on specific constellations and specific parts of the sky. And the characteristics of those constellations will often appear in the same constellation, will play a similar character in different myths around the world. So a storm god or the most powerful god, the thunder god, will almost always be associated with a specific constellation. the constellation Hercules. So the god Thor can be seen to match up with that specific constellation. But Zeus is also a thunder god who wields the thunderbolt, and he's the strongest god in the Greek myths. And he's also associated, you can clearly see if you look at enough myths, that he is associated, or I argue that you can clearly see.
Yeah.
This is not something that is widely known or widely accepted yet, but you can clearly see that Zeus is also based on the constellation Hercules. And I've got some slides to show that to people. So we can pop up slides whenever you're ready. Well, what I would argue is that this mythical evidence is yet another enormous body of evidence that points to the existence of some extremely ancient culture that predates the oldest cultures that we know about. Predates ancient Egypt, predates ancient Babylon, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Sumer, because those myths from ancient Babylon are using this system. And the myths from ancient Egypt are using this system. And the myths from ancient India, there's another extremely ancient culture, the Indus Valley culture, or the Indus Saraswati Valley civilization, very ancient. The Indian ancient Vedas are using this system of celestial metaphor. And I think, so I don't think we can say what they were doing this for. I've got some pretty strong ideas that I've formulated over the years about what they were trying to do with it. But I don't think they were just, certainly they saw the heavens as a very important part of the universe. But I think they were also using it as a system to convey things about invisible matters or about infinite matter. We can talk about what I think they were doing with it. First, I think it's probably good to lay out some evidence so that people can understand what I'm talking about, because it's kind of hard. What makes it even harder is we don't really know the constellations typically. A lot of people, may be familiar with kind of zodiac signs, but not necessarily with the constellations and how those stars look, or being able to find, let's say, Sagittarius or Capricorn or Hercules or Virgo in the sky. But I think they were using it as a language, like a code, to talk about the infinite realm. Because when you look up at the heavens, it is an infinite realm. You are looking out into infinity. So I think they were talking about things like, you guys talk about synchronicities. Well, what is that? What is that when somebody gets a message, don't go, in their truck, and then they stop, and then they just miss getting run over by a semi-truck or something? Where did that come from? Well, I think that's what the myths are. I think they are a system for talking about real things that we need in our daily life, but that are hard to understand without metaphor. So telling a story can go and explain it to a deeper part of our consciousness than kind of our day-to-day thinking mind. That's what I think they were doing. We can talk about that more if you want.
Yeah.
You have any idea what this is a painting trying to depict? It's a Bible story.
No, but it's got like a lady or a queen on one of those, what do you call those things that you...
Yeah, exactly
the
right.
The slaves carry?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, well,
Like
they
a
might not
sedan
be
chair or
slaves. They
something.
could be employees.
They could be priests. They shave their heads, so they might be priests. But anyway, but walking right next to her, you can see two women carrying something too. You see that?
Oh, a baby, yep.
Baby in a basket.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a depiction of the story of, from Sunday school.
Darren?
I have no idea.
Everyone out there in the Grimerica audience is yelling at their screen.
You think so?
The answer. What?
I don't know.
That's right.
Noah's Ark?
No. That's actually a really interesting guess though, because it's baby Moses. Baby Moses was cast adrift among the bulrushes. You can see there's some
The bulrushes hanging down from the
flowers
basket.
hanging down on the basket.
Yeah.
And actually the word that's used is an ark. So the baby was floated in an ark into the Nile by his mother. So he was cast adrift into the Nile. This is, I think it's Genesis. It's in Exodus 2. Sorry. So it's in the book of Exodus, chapter 2, and the children of Israel are in Egypt as slaves, and the Pharaoh is killing all the male babies. So the mother floats her baby. A mother conceives and has a baby, but she keeps it secret so that Pharaoh won't kill it. This is in Exodus 2. So she floats the baby in an ark made of bulrushes among the reeds, and then she doesn't want the baby to be, found or killed. But then the Pharaoh's daughter, the princess, comes down with her maidens to bathe at the water, and she finds the baby. And then she's so enchanted by the baby that she's going to raise the baby. And then the sister, this is baby Moses. So Moses' older sister was kind of watching, and she comes down and says, "Hey, you want me to find a nurse for this baby?" And the Pharaoh's daughter says, "Yes, go get a nurse, to breastfeed the baby." And so the sister goes and gets the actual mother of Moses to be the nurse. So Moses' mother gets to continue to have the bond and raise Moses, but then he becomes a prince of Egypt, and that's the story. Well, as it turns out, this pattern of a baby being cast adrift in the waters is found literally around the world. There are many myths where this happens. I just happen to have pictures of the Moses incident because that gets painted a lot. But actually, what's really interesting is that this artist has incorporated a lot of celestial references in the painting. You can't really, it wouldn't be worthwhile for me to talk about those now, but maybe later we'll get a chance to. But like these fans that that this guy is fanning, the two guys are fanning the queen with, and the woman playing the musical instrument. These are celestial symbols that have been incorporated into this. This is a celestial scene. But let me go to another one. This is the same scene. This is painted by someone, Konstantin Flavitsky. He only lived to be 35 or 36, but he painted this scene. You can see there's some common elements. These are celestial elements. But
Baby
anyway,
Moses looks pretty old in that one.
Yeah, he's been.
Looks like he's balding.
Anyway, there's baby Moses. But let me tell you a couple other examples of this same pattern. And I'm going to use do you guys remember Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood?
Yep.
Graham does. Darren's like, what are you talking
I
about?
remember that.
Before his time.
I remember. Won't you be my neighbor?
Yeah, he was great. So I grew up, watching Mr. Rogers, and he would go to the land of make-believe. The thing I liked about Mr. Rogers, and I think they kind of parodied Mr. Rogers. I think the Wayans brothers parodied Mr. Rogers. Like he would introduce a word, and he would say, "Can you say, whatever?" So I'm going to introduce a word, oikotype, which is not a common word. Oikotype is OICO, oiko, and then type. It's actually a word that was, it comes from botany to describe different types of plants that are within the same family. But there was a Swedish folklorist named Carl von Sydow, Carl Wilhelm von Sydow, he was Swedish folklorist who studied different myths and folklore. And he said, kind of like in botany, where there's different plants in the same group, these myths seem to have oikotypes or patterns, myth patterns that repeat from culture to culture. And just as I was about an hour ago getting ready to introduce that word, I've used it in a couple of books. I use it in this most recent book. I use it in Astrotheology for Life, where I talk about these myth patterns. And I said, I'm going to talk about this word oikotype to Graham and Darren. I wonder if Carl von Sydow, he's from Sweden. The actor Max von Sydow is from Sweden. I wonder if they're related in any way. So I went on the internet and looked. Carl von Sydow introduced this term oikotype in 1927 to talk about myth patterns. In 1929, he had a son named He named him Karl von Sydow, and Karl von Sydow became an actor. He changed his name to Max. His stage name, or his name, is now Max von Sydow. That, you know who Max von Sydow is?
Moses?
No.
No, he's a really famous actor. He was in Minority Report. He was the bad guy in Minority
okay.
Report,
Yeah.
Tom Cruise. He was in Game of Thrones as the most recent three-eyed
Alleged
raven.
bad guy.
Yeah, alleged bad guy, right?
Because technically he didn't commit the crime yet, did he?
Oh no, yeah. Well, no, he was trying to have Tom Cruise put into the pre-crime.
All right. Well, you can't blame him.
Yeah. But that's Max von Sydow. He's the son of Karl von Sydow, who came up with the idea of the word oikotype that I've been using for, 2 books now, and I didn't even realize it was the father of Max von Sydow. So this myth pattern of baby Moses, there is a king in Sumer, or Akkad, actually, in Babylon, named Sargon, who lived like 2000 BC, or possibly earlier than that. And his mother set him adrift in the river. There is a story in Japan of a god and goddess who have a child who's born with no bones, and he's called the leech child, Hiruko, and they set him adrift in a boat in the sea. There is the story of baby Maui, who is in the myths of the Pacific, and when he's born, in some of the versions of the Maui story, his parents are horrified because the baby has 8 heads, and they throw him into the sea. And he's there in the sea foam, and his grandfather comes and gets him and rescues him, basically, out of the sea foam. Just like in the Moses story, the baby's always gets rescued. He's cast adrift, but he's rescued. There's even one in ancient India in the Mahabharata, or the Mahabharata, which is an ancient epic, a Sanskrit epic. It's very well known in India. They have, if you go on YouTube, you can look up Mahabharata, or Mahabharata is how it's spelled, and you'll find all these big, Bollywood productions, kind of like in the 50s where we would have these big giant sword and sandal epics about like Moses, or about the Roman Empire, or about the Greek myths. They have all these about the stories of the Mahabharata. And in that story, there's a baby named Karna who is also set adrift in the river by his mother. And I could tell you the whole story why he's set adrift. But this same pattern keeps popping up around the world. So I've got here a map. This is a 1794 map. So you can see it doesn't have Antarctica on it, but
still has the ice wall. Is that the ice wall going around it?
That's only in the flat Earth. This is the double flat Earth here. There's only one little place where you can get between the 2 flat Earths on this one. So look at all the places that this myth pops up. So Japan's way up there in the upper right corner. There's India. There's one in Mesopotamia. There's one in the Nile River, from the Hebrew scriptures, or the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament. And then the myths of the Pacific really actually cover a huge amount of area. The Polynesian culture, or the Pacific culture that have the Maui stories, actually covers the largest space of any culture on Earth. They stretch all the way from New Zealand, or Aotearoa, all the way out to Easter Island, all the way up to Hawaii. And there's even some islands to the left, or on the west of the screen there, that have Maui myths.
I love Maui. He's my favorite.
Yeah, so Maui was cast adrift in the same pattern. So this is very hard to explain. This is very hard to say how this pattern keeps popping up. And so there are different theories that, well, maybe there's a collective unconscious. Well, that's possible. Maybe the ancient Egyptians were sailing around and spreading their myth to India, and then eventually the ancient Egyptians went to Japan, and then they went to Maui. What I think is a much more likely scenario is that these are all echoes of a even more ancient system that was using the stars and had this pattern of a baby cast adrift. And that pattern was remembered in all these different places, or was adapted in different places, but it still has a very repeating pattern. It's an oikotype. It's a myth pattern that's found around the world. Now, this one, you might say, wait a minute, you're missing a couple continents there. Where's the arrow on the
North and South America? Yeah.
North and South America? Where's the arrow on Australia? Well, there's different myths that repeat on those continents too. This one, I don't know of a baby cast adrift in the Americas, but I've got another myth, a different oikotype that does have that. This is the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. It's a pattern that repeats. It's the unsuccessful retrieval from the dead. So it's not always Orpheus and Eurydice. That's just the pattern as it manifests in Greece. This is the story of Orpheus. It may not be as well known, but Orpheus was the greatest musician who ever lived in the Greek myths. He played the stringed lyre instrument, and he was so amazing with his music that even like the rocks would start to weep if he started to play a sad song or something. He could just evoke whatever emotion he wanted. He was so gifted. And he was in love with the beautiful Eurydice. It's spelled like Eurydice, Eurydice. So Eurydice, on the day of their wedding, the very day that they're to be married, steps on a serpent and is bitten and dies. So she goes down to Hades, and then Orpheus is, of course, distraught. So he goes down to the underworld, and he goes all the way down in front of the king and the queen of the dead in the land of Hades, and he begs them to let Eurydice go. Please let her come back to the living world. So, and maybe he plays his lyre, plays some music to move their hearts. Anyway, they're moved to say, okay, you can have her back. Here's the conditions. She will follow you back to the land of the living, out of Hades, but out through the gates of the dead, all the way up the narrow passageway to the land of the living. But you must not look back. You must not look back at her. You just have to trust that we are keeping our word and that she's following you until you get back to the land of the living, until she's back out of the underworld in the land of the living. You must not look back. If you do, the deal's off. She comes back with us. And Orpheus says, okay, I can do that. Might be hard. So he starts going up the path. He can't hear her behind him because she's a shade or a ghost. But he just has to trust. It's hard. He wants to look back to see his beloved if she's following. But no, he uses his willpower. He gets up, and then there's kind of like a step to get back up to the land of sunshine. And he steps up, and he, without even really thinking, he turns around to help her up. And that's the last he sees her. He sees her, he turns around, and she's fading away into the underworld. Here's another picture of it. He's made it. He's almost out. He's out. She's almost out. He turns around without thinking. There's Orpheus. You can see his stringed instrument in this painting from the 1800s. And she vanishes back to the underworld. He missed his chance. You guys still there?
Yeah, this isn't the same icotype as the babies, is it?
No, there's a different one.
So can we just tie up the baby one for a sec? Because that's shared all over the world, and it's tied into the stars and the constellations. So are they all somehow taking the same message out of the stars on that?
Yes, and I would argue it's the same region of the sky that we're talking about here.
Oh, okay. So
what's amazing is, but yeah, I'm going to show you the region of the sky.
Okay, cool.
But I felt like people might be saying, wait a minute, what about the Americas?
Yeah,
So
okay. I see what you're saying.
Actually, this one happens to be all the way across North America from.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
From
So it kind of ties it. I mean, it could be a greater oikotype in a way, maybe.
Well, so this is really interesting. These are oikotypes that really repeat around the globe. this one about the failed retrieval from the dead.
Mhm.
Like I was saying, there are Native American nations or tribes from all the way across from the farthest west, northwest, down into the southwest, up into the northeast. Even there was a missionary a Jesuit missionary in the 1500s, or I think it was the 1500s. I wrote about it in my book, Astrotheology for Life. I could look up what year it was. I think it was the late 1500s. He was in the Iroquois and the Huron nations of the north, what's today New York area, and he remarked in his writings about they have this myth that's almost exactly the same as the Eurydice myth and Orpheus myth. There's even books, and Graham Hancock actually mentions these books in his latest book. He mentions the Orpheus myth being in the Americas, but it's not just in the Americas. So we'll circle back to the baby in a second. Graham is very concerned about the baby.
No, that makes sense now. I see what you're. I see where you're going.
No, but I wanted to also show. So there she is being bit by a serpent on the foot, right? Serpent foot. That's important. Remember that. This is in Japan, so we have another example of this. This is actually the parents who set their baby adrift. Well, later the wife. This is Izanagi. I might not be pronouncing it correctly. And Izanami. The wife is Izanami. The husband is Izanagi, or the male and the female. Izanagi and Izanami. And Izanami actually dies in childbirth later. After they set the first baby adrift, she gives birth to a fire baby, and then she's burned up and she dies, and she goes down to the underworld. And Izanagi goes down, and it's the same thing. He wants to bring her back, but he has an unsuccessful journey as well, and he gets actually chased out of the underworld.
Wow.
But it's the same pattern. This is a different, slightly different variation on the same pattern, but this is a story in the Bible where a wife is not allowed to look back. So in this case, the wife isn't allowed to look back. Do you guys happen to know this
Sodom
story?
and Gomorrah?
Correctamundo. So that is the destruction of Sodom right there, with the fire raining down from heaven, and Lot and his two daughters are escaping there because they've been told by an angel, hey, you better take your family and get out because Sodom is going to be destroyed. And don't look back. Nobody look back. If you look back, it will not go well for you. So Lot and his daughters are heading off. You can see them down the path. But Lot's wife, she can't bear it. She has to look back. She turns around, and do you know what happens to her?
She turns to stone. And then don't the daughters try and bang their dad?
Yes. She turns into a pillar of salt, actually, but which is just as bad. Here's a medieval version from the Nuremberg Chronicles. You can see she's turned into a pillar of salt there. She's looking back at the fire raining
Looks
down,
like a
fire and
salt
brimstone.
shaker.
Well, the medieval painters were, they had their own style. But you can see Lot is being led out by led out by an angel, sorry, and his two daughters are right next to him. Here's one more, same pattern, two daughters, and you can see they're back in the kind of background in the far left lower corner. The artist has told us
Lot's wife.
She turned into a pillar of salt. Not very funny. It's kind of a scary. Actually, I had a Bible book when I was a kid. These are the kind of things that traumatize you when you're little, that had pictures. It was a fantastic Bible book, fantastic pictures. And I remember being scared of the picture of Lot's wife, turned into a pillar of salt. I was like, wow, that was pretty traumatic. So this one, this oikotype that I just mentioned, once again, Japan in the Bible. What's the one
in Europe there?
Oh, one's in Greece, one's in the Bible. That's what I'm showing. That arrow that's pointing to the red, lowest part of the red Europe there, that's
Greece.
That's the Greek. That's Orpheus and Eurydice.
Right.
Then there's one from the Bible, then there's one from Japan, and then it's all across America. And what's really interesting is there are more details in the Native American versions of this myth than in the Orpheus and Eurydice story or in the Izanagi and Izanami story. It's almost like they have more of the story. So in the Native American tradition, the husband who goes down to retrieve his wife has to cross a bridge in a lot of these. I talk about this in Astrotheology for Life. Has to cross a shaky bridge, or sometimes it's a bridge that's just made out of a single rope. And while he's going across the bridge, an eagle will try and fly down and scare him. And if he falls into the water, he'll turn into a fish. But no, he makes it across. Then he gets to the land of the dead, and the dead are dancing. They're doing a special circular dance. So this relates to like the ghost dance. You may have heard of the ghost dance that when that happened in the 1800s. It was to renew the land and also to get rid of the invaders. But so there's a lot of details in the Native American versions, and there's lots of versions in the Native American tribes of this same pattern that are not present in the European or the Bible or the Japan pattern manifestation. So I think these all come from some very ancient source. Maybe that source was in the Americas, because the Americas have more details of this myth. But how do you explain these very close similarities around the world? Well, I'm going to tell you that because they're all using the same system, they're using a common worldwide system of star myths. So now we'll go back to I put this in to go back to baby Moses. Here's one more. All of these little details, you can see someone's holding like a feather duster there, right behind a woman who's holding a flower. The holding of a flower, these are celestial clues. I believe these are celestial clues. Even the figure who's got, I think it's her feet in the water there, she's in the shape of a different constellation. These are in the Nile River. What do you think would represent the river that the baby is pulled out of in the sky?
The Milky Way?
Milky Way, right. So now, that's right. And the Milky Way, by the way, is also the fire and brimstone that rains down on Sodom and Gomorrah, that Lot's wife is not supposed to look back at. So can you see my stars on the screen here?
Yep.
Right on. So they kind of look in the sky. You know, the night sky is dark at night, and then the stars are light. But it's easier to see on the screen if I reverse that. But can you see the Milky Way there?
Yep.
And the Milky Way, you know, it's glorious if you can get out to a dark place and really see the Milky Way and see all these stars. But I'm going to reverse all the colors now.
You can still see the Milky Way there.
You can see the Milky Way, but now everything that's bright is dark and everything that's dark is bright. So all the stars are now black dots, but of course in the night sky, they're shining light dots. So this is the region of the sky that I think we're talking about. So I'm going to show you a few constellations. There's the Milky Way, just in case everybody is not familiar of exactly what we're talking about. It's within those two lines. That's where the Milky Way is. Back in the dark, you can see it there. There it is. Okay. So some constellations that are involved here. Scorpio. Scorpio is just now coming up into the sky in the later hours, and Scorpio really dominates in the summer. Big, beautiful constellation. It's a lot bigger in real life than it looks on the screen here. It is a really glorious, big constellation, pretty easy to find, and very important in the myths. Right above Scorpio, this is a constellation not as many people know about. Super important constellation, Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus looks like a figure standing right on top of Scorpio. And the name Ophiuchus actually means serpent holder. He's holding a serpent, kind of like around his waist or something. Can you kind of see that?
Yep.
I bet Scorpio's the snake, isn't it?
Yeah. So what happened to Eurydice? How did she die?
Stood on the snake.
Stepped on a snake, right? So Scorpio plays a snake. Scorpio plays a dragon. So well played, Darren. You're absolutely right. That's the snake. And if you read the book of Genesis, when Adam and Eve are thrown out of the Garden of Eden, Eve is told, there's a prophecy that's given. The seed of the woman will step on the seed of the serpent, so that the offspring of the serpent will bite his heel, and your offspring will step on his head. Well, here we have the constellation Virgo. So Virgo is a constellation that looks like a woman, and actually she's lying on her back the way we see her in the northern hemisphere, with her legs elevated and apart. You can see that Virgo could be imagined as a woman giving birth. Can you kind of see that?
Yep.
I mean, if you've ever been present at a birth, that's the way the hospital room is set up. And you can see that Ophiuchus could be envisioned as her child that she gave birth to.
Yep.
That's the seed of the woman who's stepping on the seed of the serpent. You see that? But the seed of the serpent is biting the heel of the seed of the woman from Genesis. It's in Genesis 3, I think verse 16. Virgo could also be envisioned as giving birth to Scorpio instead. In different myths, Scorpio is who she gives birth to. Remember, why did the parents of Maui throw Maui in the sea foam?
I don't remember.
Because he had 8 heads.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
In some versions of the story, Maui was born with 8 heads. Well, Scorpio is a constellation that is halfway in the Milky Way. You see that?
Yep.
So Maui was the baby that was thrown into the sea foam. The ark, remember, Moses was placed in a basket. An ark of bulrushes is what it said. Actually, Scorpio could also be envisioned as a boat or a little canoe or something. And there's many myths where Scorpio plays a boat and Ophiuchus is a figure standing in the boat. In fact, there's a famous Norse myth where Thor goes fishing and goes fishing with a Jotun. You know what a Jotun is? Like a giant, a frost giant. It's spelled with a J, but they pronounce their J's like a Y in Scandinavia. So Jotun. Loki was actually a Jotun. And so the Jotun standing in the boat is actually Ophiuchus standing above Scorpio. And remember who I said Thor was? We'll get to Thor is actually Hercules. So there's Hercules in the boat with the Jotuns. Okay, so we threw Maui into the sea. We put the baby in the basket in the sea. You may be looking at this and saying, come on, really? Is that a basket in the ocean? The pattern is very, very distinct around the world. The baby is always put in a basket that's made out of reeds or of, bulrushes, reeds or rushes, like the kind of big grasses that grow up next to a swamp, like the big, cattails. Because Scorpio kind of looks like a bundle of reeds or a bundle of bulrushes.
Yeah. Virgo kind of looks like the person falling back down to hell too.
Right. Well, so that's a very good point. So the constellation Ophiuchus actually plays the gates of hell, the gates of Hades in a lot of myths. Ophiuchus can play a giant, but Ophiuchus can also play a door or a gate. And I find this around the world in these myths. And Ophiuchus could also play a house or a tent. You can see why it looks like a tent, right?
Yeah.
Or a tower. It could also be a tower. And so Virgo she's falling back into the land of the realm of the dead there. But remember, Orpheus was not supposed to look back. So this is Sagittarius. Sagittarius is another extremely important constellation. Sagittarius, the way it's outlined here, looks like it's kind of walking in one direction and looking back in another direction. Can you kind of envision that?
Yeah, totally. Almost like it's gonna shoot a bow at the snake.
Yeah, so in Sagittarius does shoot a bow at the snake in a lot of myths. So there are myths where Apollo fights a dragon. Apollo is a god of archery. Well, that's Sagittarius fighting Scorpio. But in this myth of not looking back, that's Sagittarius is the one who should not look back. So Lot's wife looks back, she gets turned into a pillar of salt. Once again, the Milky Way looks kind of like a fire and brimstone. She's looking back towards the destruction. This is how these patterns work. And so Scorpio and Sagittarius and Ophiuchus are right next to basically the brightest part of the Milky Way. And so they show up in some very important myths, often having to do with being on the edge of the water or the edge of a river, the edge of a pool, the edge of ocean, like Maui was thrown into the sea foam right at the edge of the ocean. And then Maui was actually pulled up out of the water by his powerful grandfather, whose name was Tama, T-A-M-A. It's a long Polynesian name, and I don't want to say it wrong, so I'll just say Tama right now. But he's pulled up out of the water. No, it's Tama. Oh, I'm not going to attempt it.
It's okay.
I just watch Moana a lot, so.
Okay, right on. I haven't actually watched it because I don't want to get the wrong picture of Maui. Although I hear it's really good.
Hey, you're welcome.
I haven't seen it. But he's pulled up out of the water by his great, powerful ancestor, Tama. And so a baby who is lifted up is often lifted up by Hercules. So in this myth of Maui, it's his grandfather is played by the mighty constellation Hercules. And I'll show you why. Because right in front of Hercules, Corona Borealis is right in front of Hercules. And it means the northern crown. Corona means crown. Borealis means of the north. So Corona Borealis is the northern crown. And Hercules can be envisioned as grasping the northern crown. If you just imagine one additional connecting line. You see that?
Yeah.
So my argument is that there are many myths, and I've seen enough patterns to say I am convinced the evidence is overwhelming that Hercules grasps the northern crown in a lot of myths, and that's the baby that he's pulling up out of the water, which is not something you wouldn't look at the northern crown and say, oh yeah, that looks like a baby. But around the world, we find patterns where a Hercules figure is pulling up a baby that is connected to the northern crown. And so that, I would argue, is very strong evidence that these myths were not just invented separately from one another. In other words, somebody could say, oh yeah, Dave is arguing that we've got this oikotype showing up in Japan, we've got it showing up in Maui, in the cultures of the Pacific with the Maui myths, we've got it showing up in the Bible, we've got it showing up in India. They just came up with it themselves independently because they all look at the same stars. I'm here to tell you right now, these constellations aren't super easy to see unless you know what you're looking for.
There's no way you'd come up with the same stories either.
And they come up with the same pattern over and over. Now I'm going to show you some evidence that Hercules grasps a crown. So here's a close-up of Hercules. There's the northern crown. Can everyone see it in the lower right there?
Yep, which also could look like a basket, really, right?
It could look like a basket. That's very,
Or a bird that's about to get fucked up.
very true. Yeah, because he's holding a big sword, right? It could also be a necklace. It plays a necklace in a lot of myths. Loki actually steals a necklace belonging to Odin's wife in one of the Norse myths. So I believe it's that necklace right there. But remember, Hercules can be envisioned as grasping the northern crown. I added this line. That's my argument. Now let's look at Hercules. This is an ancient Greek vase. And that's the hero whose name in ancient Greece was actually Heracles. Heracles. The Roman or Latin version of his name is Hercules. But can you see that he's in a similar posture to the constellation we just looked at?
Yep.
He's got one leg way back. And let's go back to Hercules has one leg way back.
Yeah.
He's got a weapon overhead, one arm up. And what's he doing with his other arm?
Grabbing that dude by the throat.
Well, you would think he would be grabbing it by the throat, but look up above that guy's helmet. I'll zoom in. Can you see a little hand there?
Oh, yeah.
What's the shape of that guy's helmet's crest?
The crown.
It's like an arc, right? We see this again and again in ancient artwork. So this isn't just Dave making this up. Here we have a Hercules figure grasping an arc-shaped crest.
Looks like it was leg day too.
Yeah, well, those guys had really good like squat racks, so they could really squat like 550 pounds, I think. So Yeah, you probably needed for that kind of combat where his shield is bashing up against the other guy and
Yeah.
like trying to get through. They probably got pretty bulky. I mean, I think those Greek warriors were pretty
Oh yeah, they were
mountains of muscle. Anyway, there you go.
Huh.
I'm arguing, and in fact, there's more details. Hercules or Heracles, he usually has a full beard, right? A big square-shaped beard. What's the shape of the head of the constellation Hercules in the heavens? And a square shape, right?
Oh yeah.
In fact, he often wears over his head the lion skin. You see that? To make his head even more square and like he has a mane all the way around. Hercules figures in myth will often have that kind of beard, a full beard. Although it's not always a male figure. Sometimes all these constellations play different characters. Sometimes they play a male character, sometimes they play a female character in these myths around the world. I'm going to show you a few more. Here he is grasping a crest again. Leg way out to the back, one leg extended way out to the back, right? He's holding a crest all the way over on the right side.
Yeah.
There's the crest. He's holding it with his hand. But look at this one. Here's Heracles. Now he's not fighting a warrior. He's encountering a god named Achelous, a river god, a river deity. I'm not exactly sure. I think that river, I don't think it looks like the god is puking there, but I think that's a river flowing out of his mouth. Not sure what the ancient artist was showing us there, but look at how the Hercules figure, or Heracles, is in the same outline as the constellation Hercules, right? His legs are in the same posture. He's got his club up over his head, right?
Yeah.
And what's he doing? He's holding a thing that's shaped like an arc. In other words, the horn of the river god is the arc-shaped thing. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So anyway, these myths are based on the stars. So that's why the same figure in different mythologies will have the same characteristics. A figure who is based on Hercules will usually be the figure who's going to wield the most powerful weapon, the god who has the most powerful weapon, which is usually the thunderbolt. So Zeus here, you see Zeus up there in the top picture?
Mm-hmm.
The ancient artist has even written Zeus for us, so we know it's Zeus. He's got a thunderbolt. Look at the posture that he's in. He is in the exact posture of the constellation Hercules. In fact, I would argue he's fighting against an Ophiuchus figure. You see the serpents there?
Yeah.
Ophiuchus holds serpents, right?
Is that Quasimodo down below?
Yeah, so down below, that is actually from a Maya codex.
Quetzalcoatl.
So I believe it's actually, I don't think it's Quetzalcoatl. The Quetzalcoatl is actually an Aztec name for a god who's called Gucumatz in the Maya, I'm pretty sure. But that god, Gucumatz, I would associate with Ophiuchus. This is a god who's known as Heart of Sky, who's also known as Sudden Thunderbolt or One Thunderbolt. So he's the thunderbolt god of the Maya. And can you see that he's depicted in the exact same physical body posture to line up with the constellation Hercules? It's just reversed.
Yeah.
The artist has chosen to have him facing to the left, but that is clearly the constellation Hercules, and he's holding some kind of a weapon, possibly a thunderbolt weapon, because he's a Hercules figure. He even has a kind of square-shaped headdress to make his head kind of shaped like the constellation. Am I wrong?
No, that's what it seems like. Yeah.
So here we have, this is why what I'm saying is these gods and these figures in myth are based on a common celestial pattern. And if I showed you these two things and you were a professor of history or art history or mythology, you would have a hard time explaining this, because this is a piece of artwork up at the top from ancient Greece. This is a piece of artwork from the Maya of Central America, of the Yucatan and Guatemala area, and what's today Mexico and Guatemala. How are they using the exact same pattern for a thunderbolt god? Because they're based on the stars. Either that, or the Greeks accidentally took a trip over to the Maya, but that doesn't really work because the time frame, or maybe the Maya influenced the Greeks. But either that or they came from a common ancestor. I think it's from a common ancestor.
Yeah,
I mean, we could come up with lots of different explanations, but I believe this evidence, this is worldwide, and the amount of evidence is simply overwhelming.
And nobody's put this together before, right? Really?
Well, no.
Not in
People
this
have put
way,
it together.
anyway.
People have put it together. This is,
David Warner Mathisen.
well, but I'm building on the work. Plato in ancient Greece, I think, hints at these things. Aristotle, some other ancients hint at it. Plutarch.
Yeah, but they wouldn't have known the global scale of it back then.
But they didn't know the global scale of it. So that, and also the way you outline the constellations is going to be important. And so I've talked about it before, but H.A. Rey, his outlining system, turns out it matches right up with the ancient artwork. H.A. Rey is the author who wrote the Curious George books.
And that fits in better than the contemporary constellation art, right? Yeah.
The contemporary is awful. I have some examples later on we could get to, but I don't want to just do a slideshow with you guys. I want to, talk about it, but it's important to kind of show it. But the H.A. Rey, I would say the H.A. Rey system, he never, to my knowledge, talked about how this matches up with the ancient myths. But it's like he gave us the Rosetta Stone almost with his outlining system, because with his outlining system, I happened to grow up with that outlining system. My parents got me the H.A. Rey books on the stars when I was very little. That's how I've always envisioned them. And then when I started to, and I wasn't out looking for this, I was taking the Bible literally. But when I read Hamlet's Mill and got really fascinated by it, I started to see, oh, they're arguing that some of these Bible stories, like the story of Samson, or some of these events in the Revelation, book of the Revelation, are based on the stars. And I didn't want to accept that at first, but the more I already knew a lot about the stars and I knew a lot about the Bible, I said, actually, their arguments are making a lot of sense here. So there have been people who have argued this, but the writers of Hamlet's Mill, they wrote in 1969, or their book was published in 1969. I'm convinced they did not know the H.A. Rey outlining system, because a lot of their suggestions of what it could mean are completely, to put it kindly, wrong. They were doing their best. They were seeing something is here, but they couldn't put it all together. H.A. Rey published that book in 1952. They wrote Hamlet's Mill in 1969. They could see, hey, there's these patterns echoing around the world. And remember, I told you, Max von Sydow's father was writing about oikotypes in 1927. There were people writing about these connections between the myths in the 1800s. In fact, when the Mesopotamian tablets were first dug up, and they found a flood myth in there that sounded exactly, it even had an ark, and the Noah figure, he's not called Noah he's called Utnapishtim, but the Utna has a Noah sound to it. Na, Utnapishtim, and Noah are the Noah figure in the Mesopotamian tablets releases birds to see if it's safe to go out of the ark. Well, what does that sound like? And these are from thousands of years before the Bible was thought to have been written. So when they first came across those tablets, I wrote a blog post about this. The translator, George Smith, he was this young guy who learned how to decipher the text. He was a genius, and he was deciphering them. And when he came across the Noah story, no one had there was like 2 people in the world who could read this text, and he was trying to decipher all these tablets. And when he started to read the Noah story, he got so distraught, he started to run around excitedly and take all his clothes off. It's like he had a mental breakdown almost when he saw a Noah story in some tablets that were thousands of years earlier. This is in the 1800s in England. He knew he had come across something that was enormous. So in the 1800s, they were starting to say, wait a minute, as we learn more about the world myth, we're starting to see patterns pop up. So it's not like I'm the only one to have seen this, but I have taken the H.A. Rey outlines and said, wait a minute, I think this helps us to really decipher these myths. And so I can't stop writing about it. Like you asked at the beginning, I did 912 pages. I'm trying to show this. It's like, the world doesn't accept this. Like, you know, I've sent books to professors. They don't read it.
No.
Maybe they read it, but they don't say, "Oh, great, we're going to change all our course material."
So they might eventually. I mean, you're writing them like encyclopedias. I could see a day.
Well, so what I would say to all the listeners is buy them for your local library, or if you know someone who's a professor or you know someone's in college, try and get their library to buy it so that it's, you know, a resource for the college students to have. You don't have to buy it yourself. You can tell the library to buy it and they'll buy it. They've got a budget to buy books.
That's a great idea.
And that's the way I think, you know, you make it available to like college students and college professors. The amount of evidence is just overwhelming. I've just scratched the surface. I've got more. Oh, here we are in ancient India. I mean, I should turn off the slideshow so we can just talk. But this is a character, a god, who's named Hanuman. And Hanuman, I would argue, is another Hercules figure. Look at, he carries a giant mace. And in this case, he's picking up a mountain. He had to save someone's life with a special herb. And they told him the mountain where it grew. And he got to the mountain and he said, I'm not sure which of these herbs it is, so I'll just bring the whole mountain. Well, you can see Hercules is reaching down towards Ophiuchus. That's why he's picking up a mountain. But he's carrying a giant mace. He's got his leg extended, just like Hercules figures do. So this is worldwide. And I could just go on the whole time showing you evidence, but you know, maybe I should just pause and like.
Well, yeah, I got a couple quick questions about it. So the icotypes from all over the world, the baby and the person falling back to hell or whatever, and then you show that the Milky Way was visible with Ophiuchus and Hercules and the scorpion. So was there any other examples of the baby in the river? Like, is the baby being put in the Milky Way then? As far as constellation goes, or is it that one where Hercules is pulling it out with in the basket? Like,
right. So the baby is put into an ark among the reeds. That's Ophiuchus above Scorpio.
Right. Okay.
That's my argument.
Okay.
And
So
Ophiuchus
in that
right.
myth, it's Scorpio, and in the other myth, Scorpio is the snake. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. So
right. Yeah.
So it's a little confusing, but it's kind of. But
that makes sense.
Right next to the Milky Way.
Yeah, I forgot about that part. Yeah.
And the metaphor I say is it's kind of like you've got a certain number of actors, but they've got to play all these different roles in all these different myths. So sometimes you'll be watching a movie and you'll see an actor and you're like, wait a minute, I know her or I know him. Oh, that was in this completely different movie wearing a completely different costume, speaking in sometimes even a completely different accent, you know, taking on a totally different persona. But after a while, you recognize the actor. Well, it's the same thing with the myths. Ophiuchus could be Eurydice getting bitten on the foot by Scorpio, or it could be the seed of the woman in Genesis 3 stepping on the head of the seed of the serpent, and the seed of the serpent stepping on or biting the seed of the woman's foot, right? It's the same actors, the same constellations will play different roles. But if once you start to know them, then you go, oh, wait a minute, next to a river? Yep. Okay. Getting bitten in the foot? Yep. Oh, okay. Or being cast adrift in a river? I'll bet you that's Milky Way. So I'm going to look for the constellations next to the Milky Way. And it's always reeds and it's an arc. And by the way, Ophiuchus is kind of this boxy looking thing. That's what's going on.
Yeah.
With does that make sense? I can pull up.
No. That makes sense. Yeah.
So I actually have one more picture just to kind of close out from the Americas.
That sounds good.
Show you one more here on this. This is the Gate of the Sun at Tiwanaku in Bolivia. Well, modern day, it's on the borders of Bolivia and Peru.
Yep.
This is amazing. Look at that thing. I mean, this may have been created with some precision technology. Look at those edges.
Yeah.
But the figure on there, this is called the Gate of the Sun. Remember I told you, or I mentioned just briefly as I was just kind of machine gun pace throwing out a bunch of information, but I mentioned that Ophiuchus often plays a gate or a portal. Mm-hmm. And look at the figure above the Gate of the Sun. He's holding two.
Oh, yeah.
just like Ophiuchus is.
Stabs, two stabs or something.
Yeah. This pattern, this is an artistic pattern that is found around the world. It's found in Europe, it's found in India, it's found in ancient Egypt. It's Ophiuchus holding these two whatevers. The whatevers change what he's holding on either side. But what's really interesting is, here's a little bit of a close-up. Can you see on the edges around that central figure? You see those little figures around the edges?
Yep.
Those little guys. They have like a big staring eye. You can look
like
closely.
Oompa Loompas.
Well, I don't know what they are, but they're holding almost what looks like it might be a thunderbolt. You see how their rear leg is way extended and their heel is raised? And they have a square-shaped head. Boom. So there's Hercules and Ophiuchus again. Look at the posture of that guy.
Yeah. And it's like they're surrounding Ophiuchus and the constellation he's above. Yeah.
This is worldwide. This is ancient. This is indisputable, I would argue. I mean, there's so much. Are you guys looking at me again? Am I back?
Yep.
Yeah.
You're back.
Yeah. I think this is just, I would say the amount of evidence is at least compelling, but I would argue it's conclusive. It's like, I can fill up, I don't know how many thousands of pages now I've written about this. Each of my books is, 500, 600, 900 pages showing this. This last one, that's 912, most recent one, 912 pages, has about 300 pictures and star charts in it to try and show these connections. So it may seem a little daunting, to buy a 912-page book. So buy it for the library if you want.
It's great for the coffee table, especially because
you really want to know it.
You can do them in small. It's very easy to break into small bits, I find. Like you can read 3 pages at a time. So in that sense, it's not daunting. It's not like you're picking it up and you got to get through 900 pages because it's kind of broke down. And you can sort of go through it myth by myth.
Exactly. That is true. And who doesn't love the myths? But see, I think we love the myths, but a lot of them are bizarre or, really violent. And we often expurgate that for the kids' version of the myths. And then when you're an adult, you start reading some of the other Greek myths and you're like, whoa, where did that come from? Well, they're based on the stars. So these metaphors that they're using where there's maybe some really bizarre things happening, it's usually because that is based on the constellations.
Absolutely.
To go a little deeper, so it's not just like, ooh, that's neat. These myths are based on the stars. What I think is really going on is they're talking about us. They're talking about these myths have a message for our life.
Right on, Dave. Well, thanks for coming on the show. And I'm sure it won't be long before I talk to you again. But come back anytime, man.
Right on. Thanks for doing what you guys do. It's
awesome,
really
buddy.
important. Really important. And thanks for having me over to Grimerica.
Yeah, thanks. You too, buddy.
Okay, Dave. Bye-bye.
Been fun. Bye.
And that was a chat with David W. Mathisen, friend of the show. He's got a bunch of fans out there in Grimerica for sure. And
that was great. That was some sort of, I don't know, I didn't realize there were so many of those similar archetypes.
It'd be fantastic to be out in the desert looking at the stars with the crazy laser pointer, looking at them all. It'd be fantastic. You can't beat it.
Yeah.
Looking at that, I think around April 18th or so next year.
Right on.
Just a little weekend thing.
Awesome, yeah.
Shoot down Saturday, Sunday, maybe a Friday.
Yep.
Who knows? Anyway,
thanks for helping. Thanks for helping us do this.
Thanks for everything. Thanks for supporting the show. Thanks to Dave for coming on the show and writing thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of great resources for understanding the stars and some mythology. And like I say, that one book, the book we've got here in the studio, the volume 1 of this series, really does just read like you can read just like the myths are great. You can just read it. Be good to read to the kids before bed. Anyway, big thanks, Dave, for coming on the show. Big thanks to the supporters we got. If you're not a supporter, head over to grimerica.ca/support today. Sign up for a monthly through one of the options there, or make a one-time donation or do something fantastic like that, join the ranks of the great people that are supporting the show and helping us grow. And I think that's about it. If you do that, we'll give you the black budget fee to get a bunch more content. I think there's 30, 40 episodes in there right now, a bunch of Randall Carlson, a bunch of other great stuff. And yeah, other than that, have some good vibes. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.
Oh, the rain came down, my wallet got soaked, the money ran out. Oh, the mud was gold, the ground was cold, my dignity was never bought nor sold. Oh, choose a career, get your mind clear, keep up with the Joneses. Oh, you go in, you atone for your greed. You atone for your greed with the electric messiah. But that's just your publicity stunt. I can see your duplicity in front of your lines. Oh, the rain came down, my wallet got soaked, the money ran out. Oh, the ground was cold, the mud was gold, my dignity was never bought nor sold. Oh, choose a career, get your mind clear, keep up with the Joneses. Oh, you go in, you atone for your greed. You atone for your greed with the electric messiah. Oh, but that's just your publicity stunt. I can see your duplicity in front of your life.